A few years ago, I worked as part of the janitorial staff at my old high school. The job was easy, just a lot of mopping and wiping down desks after the students left. It wasn't the cleaning that bothered me, though. It was the late shifts. There's something different about being in a school after dark, when the halls are empty and everything seems too still. Most of the time, I could zone out and get through the work without thinking much. But there was one part of the school I hated more than anything else, the old gymnasium. They built a new gym a few years before I started working there, but the old one was still tucked away in a far corner of the school, barely used anymore. The place always gave me this weird vibe, like the air was thicker in there, and the shadows stretched longer than they should. Even in the middle of summer, the gym felt cold, and the fluorescent lights never seemed to work right, flickering just enough to make you feel uneasy. One night, I was working late again. It must have been around 11:30 p.m. The school was completely empty, and I was finishing up my rounds. I had one last spot to clean, the main hallway near the old gym. As I was pushing the mop down the corridor, I heard a sound that stopped me in my tracks. It was faint, but unmistakable. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, and coming from behind me. At first, I thought maybe it was one of the other janitors, but when I looked around, the hallway was empty. Just me and the dim lights buzzing overhead. The footsteps stopped the moment I turned. I felt my pulse quicken, but I told myself it was nothing. Probably the old building creaking, or maybe I just heard my own footsteps echoing back. I went back to mopping, trying to shake off the feeling that I wasn't alone. But then, it happened again. This time the footsteps were louder, closer, like someone was walking right behind me. I spun around, heart pounding, but again, nothing. The hallway was completely empty. Now I was starting to get seriously freaked out. I thought maybe someone was messing with me, but I knew for a fact I was the only one left in the building. The other janitors had left hours ago, and the security guard was stationed at the front entrance, nowhere near the gym. I decided to finish up quickly and get out of there. As I turned to head back toward the main office, I passed the old gym door. It was cracked open. That door was always locked. No one ever went in there. For a split second, I thought about just ignoring it and leaving. But something, curiosity, or maybe just stupidity, made me stop. I walked over and pushed the door open. Inside, the gym was dark, except for a faint light coming from the far corner. It looked like someone had left a flashlight on the floor, casting long, eerie shadows up the walls. The bleachers were folded up, and the whole place was empty, or so I thought. As I stepped inside, I felt the temperature drop. My breath misted in front of me, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I was about to turn and leave when I heard it again, those footsteps. But this time, they weren't behind me. They were inside the gym. I froze, listening. The sound was unmistakable now, echoing through the empty space. Footsteps, heavy and slow, moving closer. My eyes darted around, trying to find the source, but all I saw were the shadows cast by that faint, flickering light. Then, I saw him. He was standing at the far end of the gym, half hidden in the shadows. A tall figure, wearing what looked like an old Letterman jacket, one of those vintage ones from decades ago. His back was turned to me, his head tilted down like he was looking at something on the floor. "Hey!" I called out, my voice shaking, "and this area's closed." He didn't move. I took a step closer, my heart hammering in my chest. "You're not supposed to be here," I said again, louder this time. He still didn't move. Something about the way he was standing, too still, too rigid, sent a chill through me. I felt this creeping dread crawl up my spine, telling me to get out of there. I backed toward the door, but as I did, the figure shifted. His head turned. I couldn't see his face clearly in the darkness, but his movements were wrong. Unnatural, jerky, like something was pulling him instead of him moving on his own. His body twisted in a way that made my stomach lurch, and I heard this awful creaking sound like bones grinding against each other. And then, he started running. I didn't wait to see what he was doing or where he was going. I turned and bolted toward the exit, but as I reached the door, I heard him barreling after me, his footsteps slamming against the wooden gym floor, getting closer, faster. The door was just a few feet in front of me, but it felt like the hallway stretched longer with every step I took. I slammed into the door, yanking it open just as I felt a cold rush of air behind me, like something had reached out just inches from grabbing me. I sprinted down the hallway, not daring to look back, the sound of footsteps still chasing me, echoing off the walls. I didn't stop running until I burst into the front office, where the security guard was sitting at his desk, half asleep. I tried to explain what had just happened, but the words came out in a jumbled mess of panic. He just stared at me, confused. "You okay, man? There's no one else in the building, just you." I tried to catch my breath, my eyes darting back toward the hallway, expecting to see the figure standing there, but it was empty, silent. The next day, I told one of my coworkers about it. He gave me this strange look and said, "That old gym? No one's supposed to go in there. It's been locked up for years. They say some kid died there in the 80s during a game, but no one talks about it. I've never gone back to that gym since, but every now and then, when I'm working late and the building is quiet, I swear I still hear those footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoing down the hall." It was the end of my sophomore year, right before winter break. I remember it because the days were short and it was getting dark earlier. I stayed late for an after-school study session for our chemistry exam, and by the time I finished, it was almost pitch black outside. I usually took the late bus, which picked up just a few of us stragglers. It was one of those cold, foggy nights where the mist just kind of hangs in the air, muffling everything. I don't know why, but there was this uneasy feeling that hit me as soon as I stepped on the bus. There were only a few other kids, two sitting in the back, heads down, barely noticeable. The driver was this old guy I'd seen a few times but never really paid attention to. The route was supposed to be the same as always, but as we pulled away from the school, I noticed that we took a turn that didn't make sense. At first, I thought maybe he was just avoiding some traffic or road work, but it kept getting weirder. The street started looking unfamiliar. I figured I'd just been zoning out, so I didn't say anything at first, but after a few more minutes, I couldn't ignore it. We were in some part of town I didn't recognize at all. No houses, no lights, just these long stretches of roads swallowed up by fog. The other kids didn't seem to notice or care. I started getting this tight feeling in my chest, like something was wrong, but I didn't want to freak out over nothing. Finally, I leaned forward and asked the driver, "Hey, are we going the right way?" He didn't answer. His face didn't even change. He just kept driving, staring straight ahead like I wasn't even there. I asked again, louder this time. Still nothing. Now I'm starting to panic a little. We're in the middle of nowhere, and this guy is driving like a zombie. I pulled out my phone to check the map, but of course, there's no signal out here. I'm sitting there, staring at my phone, wondering what the hell I should do, when I hear this weird sound from the back of the bus, like mumbling. I turn around, and one of the kids, the one sitting in the very last seat, was looking right at me. His mouth was moving, but I couldn't hear what he was saying. I remember feeling cold, like the temperature in the bus just dropped. The weirdest part was that I didn't even recognize the kid. I thought I knew pretty much everyone who rode the late bus, but I had never seen him before. He just kept staring and mumbling, his eyes kind of glazed over. That's when I noticed. The other kid in the back was gone. His seat was empty, even though I hadn't seen him get off the bus. I got up and walked toward the front, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hey, you missed my stop." The driver still didn't respond, didn't even blink. It's like he was a statue. At this point, my heart was pounding in my chest. I glanced out the window and we were pulling into this clearing. Just this open, desolate area surrounded by trees, swallowed by fog. The bus stopped and the door creaked open. No one moved. I didn't know what to do. My body was screaming at me to run, but I was frozen in my seat. Then, without a word, the kid in the back stood up and walked toward the open door. As he passed me, I swear to God, I saw his face. It was pale, almost gray, like he hadn't seen the sun in years. He walked off the bus, disappearing into the fog without looking back. The driver shut the door and started driving again, still without a word. I got off at the next stop, which was miles from my house. I didn't care. I just had to get off that bus. I never saw the driver again after that night. And the next day at school, when I tried to figure out who that kid was, no one had any idea who I was talking about. This happened back when I was in 7th grade. We had a substitute teacher come in one day, and everything about it felt off from the start. I remember walking into the classroom that morning and seeing her standing there at the front of the room. She wasn't like any of the subs we'd had before. She was older, maybe late 50s or early 60s, with this long gray hair that hung down to her waist in thick, oily strands. Her face looked gaunt, like she hadn't slept in days, and her eyes, they were this pale, milky color. It made me feel uneasy just looking at her. She didn't smile or introduce herself like most subs did. She just started writing on the chalkboard, long, drawn-out sentences that didn't seem to make any sense. I remember thinking it was strange, but what really freaked me out was that none of the other kids seemed to notice. They were all sitting quietly at their desks, staring straight ahead like they were in some kind of trance. The weirdest part? There was no attendance sheet. Usually subs took attendance at the start of class, but she just didn't. No one mentioned it. The whole day was like that. Quiet, tense. The room felt colder than usual, and every time I looked at the clock, the hands didn't seem to move. Hours passed, but it felt like we were stuck in that classroom forever. No one said a word the entire time, not even me. It wasn't until the end of the day that things really took a turn. The final bell rang, but when I went to pack up my things, I realized something. None of the other kids were moving. They were still sitting there, staring at the board, motionless. The substitute was standing by the door, watching me. Her eyes locked onto mine, and I felt this sharp, cold chill run through my body. I bolted. I grabbed my bag and ran out of the room without looking back. When I got home, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The next day, I asked my friends about the substitute. They all looked at me like I was crazy. "There wasn't a substitute yesterday," one of them said. "Mrs. Parker was here. She didn't call out." I went to the office to ask about it. The secretary gave me a confused look. "We didn't have any subs in your class," she said. To this day, I have no idea who that woman was or what happened in that classroom. But every now and then, I still get this feeling, like someone's watching me. Like those pale, milky eyes are still out there, somewhere.